Riley Martinez stood outside the Galactic Council chambers, clutching a thermos of coffee like it was the last life preserver on a sinking ship. Which, considering her current situation, wasn't far from the truth. 3 months ago, she'd been happily scrubbing plasma conduits on Station Zeta-7. Now, thanks to what she could only describe as the most spectacular bureaucratic mix-up in human history, she was Earth's first interstellar ambassador. "Deep breaths, Riley," she muttered, adjusting her hastily tailored diplomatic uniform. "You've dealt with worse. Remember the antimatter toilet incident? This can't be worse than that." She was wrong. So very, very wrong. The chamber doors slid open with a hiss that sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Riley stepped into what could only be described as the galaxy's most pretentious conference room. The ceiling soared impossibly high, decorated with holographic star charts that probably cost more than Earth's entire defense budget. Around a massive crystalline table sat representatives from dozens of alien species, each one looking like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. "Ah, the human finally arrives," rumbled a voice that sounded like gravel being processed through a garbage disposal. The speaker was General Kraxon of the Dracorian Empire, a 7-foot-tall reptilian nightmare wearing what appeared to be a uniform designed by someone who thought subtle was a foreign concept. Every inch of his scaled hide was covered in medals, ribbons, and what Riley suspected were participation trophies. "Sorry I'm late," Riley said, hurrying toward the empty chair marked with Earth's flag. Traffic was murder, and you wouldn't believe the line at customs. Apparently bringing coffee into the station requires 14 different permits and a signed affidavit from your mother. She didn't see the ceremonial carpet until it was too late. The ancient Vorthan prayer rug, woven from the silk of extinct space worms and blessed by 17 different holy orders, met Riley's coffee with a splash that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Oh, crud," Riley whispered, watching the dark stain spread across symbols that probably represented thousands of years of tradition. "That's not good, is it?" The Vorthan delegate, a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a very judgmental librarian, began making sounds that Riley's universal translator helpfully rendered as ritualistic screaming of ultimate despair. "Right, so apologies about that," Riley said, pulling out a napkin and making the stain demonstrably worse. "I'll totally pay for the cleaning. Do you guys take human credit cards, or is it more of a trade situation? I've got some really nice soap in my quarters." The screaming intensified. Other delegates began joining in, creating a cacophony that sounded like a space orchestra having a collective nervous breakdown. "Perhaps," suggested Ambassador Fluffy of the Whisker Federation, his voice somehow managing to be both adorable and terrifying, "the human could demonstrate proper respect by prostrating herself before the sacred carpet she has defiled." Riley blinked. Ambassador Fluffy looked exactly like what would happen if you crossed a Persian cat with a tiny business suit and gave it access to weapons of mass destruction. His species had conquered 14 star systems through what their history books diplomatically called aggressive cuddling. "Prostrating? Like lying down? On the floor?" Riley gestured vaguely at the stained carpet. "Because I'm pretty sure that would just make the coffee situation worse. Also, I'm wearing a skirt." The Crystalline Collective's representative, a being that looked like a disco ball having an existential crisis, began pulsing with what Riley's training materials had described as the light of barely contained homicidal rage. "The human mocks our sacred traditions." It chimed in harmonics that made Riley's teeth ache. "She shows no respect for the ancient ways." "I'm showing plenty of respect," Riley protested, still dabbing at the carpet with her napkin. "I said I was sorry, didn't I? And I offered to pay for cleaning. What more do you want?" The answer, apparently, was her complete and utter humiliation. What had started as a routine trade negotiation was rapidly devolving into what Riley could only describe as the galaxy's most expensive group therapy session, with herself as the designated punching bag. General Kraxon rose from his seat with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested he'd been practicing this moment in the mirror. "Perhaps," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for small children and reality TV stars, "this incident demonstrates why the human species is not ready for galactic civilization." Riley looked around the room at the assembled aliens, each one nodding in agreement with varying degrees of smugness. 3 months ago, she'd been wondering if she'd remembered to pay her student loans. Now she was apparently representing the entirety of human civilization to a room full of beings who thought she was about as competent as a concussed hamster. "You know what?" she said, crumpling up the coffee-stained napkin. "This is going to be a long day." "Let me tell you a story about humans," General Craxon continued, clearly warming to his theme. "They have been in space for what, barely 50 years? In that time, they have managed to blow up 3 of their own space stations, start 2 trade wars, and somehow get their ambassador lost in a mall for 6 hours. Riley winced. The mall incident had been widely reported, unfortunately. In her defense, alien shopping centers were unnecessarily complicated. The Dracorian Empire, Craxon continued, has been traversing the stars for over 3,000 years. We have conquered systems, built civilizations, and maintained order across the galaxy. What have humans contributed? Instant coffee and reality television. "Hey now," Riley interjected, "our reality TV is art. Have you seen the one where they make people live in a house together and vote each other out? Pure genius." The assembled aliens exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to question humanity's intelligence even more than they already had. Riley sighed. "Time for some context. Look, I get it. I'm not exactly what you were expecting. 3 months ago, I was a maintenance engineer on Station Zeta 7. My job was cleaning plasma conduits and making sure the antimatter toilets didn't, antimatter the station out of existence. There was this one incident where a toilet malfunctioned and nearly created a black hole in the men's room, but I managed to contain it using a plunger and some really creative engineering." "You contained a potential black hole," Ambassador Fluffy said slowly, "with a plunger." "Well, the plunger was more for the psychological effect. The actual solution involved rerouting the antimatter flow through the recycling system and creating a temporary stabilization field using the station's disco ball. Long story." The crystalline collective's representative pulsed with what Riley hoped was amusement, rather than the desire to incinerate her. "The point is," Riley continued, "I ended up here because someone in the human diplomatic corps typed Riley Martinez, maintenance engineer, into the system instead of Riley Martinez, international relations specialist. Apparently there are 2 Riley Martinezes in the database. And I'm the one who knows how to fix toilets instead of negotiate trade agreements." "So you are admitting," Craxon said with obvious delight, "that humanity's first ambassador is here by mistake. A janitor, representing an entire species." "Former janitor," Riley corrected. "I've been promoted. Theoretically. The room erupted in what Riley's translator rendered as various forms of alien laughter. She was pretty sure the tentacled hive mind was actually crying tears of joy. "This is perfect," Craxon said, standing to his full intimidating height. "Absolutely perfect. Human, I want you to listen very carefully. The Dracorian Empire has been patient with your species' fumbling attempts at galactic integration. We have tolerated your primitive technology, your cultural ignorance, and your complete inability to understand basic diplomatic protocol. But this is the final insult." He gestured dramatically at the stained carpet, the spilled coffee, and Riley's general existence. "Therefore, I, General Craxon, Supreme Commander of the Dracorian Fleet and Defender of the Galactic Order, issue this ultimatum." He paused for effect, clearly having practiced this speech. "Kneel before the might of the Dracorian Empire, acknowledge humanity's inherent inferiority, and accept our guidance in all matters of galactic importance, or face annihilation." The room fell silent. This was it. The moment that would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. Riley could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She looked up at General Craxon, then around the room at the assembled aliens, all watching her with expressions ranging from smug satisfaction to mild curiosity about whether she would actually kneel. "You know what, General?" Riley said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded either enlightenment or complete psychological breakdown. "I've got a counter-offer." She smiled, And for the first time since entering the chamber, she looked genuinely comfortable. Only if you crawl. The silence that followed was so complete that Riley could hear her own heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a maintenance drone beeped uncertainly. "I beg your pardon?" Kraxon said. "Nah," his voice carrying the kind of dangerous quiet that suggested he was considering whether to vaporize Riley immediately or save her for a more theatrical execution later. "You heard me," Riley said, settling back in her chair. "You want me to kneel? Fine. But you're going to have to crawl to earn it." Ambassador Fluffy's tail began twitching in what Riley really hoped was amusement rather than a prelude to violence. "The human has clearly lost her mind," announced the Vorthan delegate, having apparently recovered from his ceremonial screaming. "The stress of representing such a primitive species has broken her completely." "Oh, I'm not broken," Riley said. "I'm just getting started." "Let me explain something to you all," Riley said, reaching into her diplomatic bag and pulling out what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary tablet. "Humans might be new to this whole galactic community thing, but we're not stupid. We're just very, very good at letting people underestimate us." She tapped the tablet, and suddenly the chamber's main display screen flickered to life, showing what appeared to be detailed schematics of every ship in the Dracorian fleet. For example, Riley continued conversationally, "General Kraxon, did you know that your flagship, the Decimator, has a critical flaw in its shield harmonics? Something about cutting costs by using substandard harmonizers from the lowest bidder. Apparently, if you hit it with a specific frequency, the entire shield grid collapses." Kraxon's eyes widened. "How do you know about the shield specifications?" "Those are classified at the highest levels." "Oh, we know lots of things. Dr. Patel, would you like to chime in here?" Riley touched her earpiece, and a cheerful voice filled the chamber. "Hello, everyone. Dr. Patel here, xenobiologist and part-time hacker. I've been studying alien technology for what we like to call purely academic purposes for the past 15 years. Fascinating stuff, really. Did you know that most alien computer systems are basically just really fancy calculators? No wonder they're so easy to hack." The Crystalline Collective's representative began pulsing rapidly. "Impossible. Our quantum encryption is unbreakable." "Yeah, about that," Dr. Patel's voice continued. "Your quantum encryption is based on a mathematical principle that my nephew solved for a high school science project. Sweet kid, terrible at basketball, but apparently a genius at breaking allegedly unbreakable codes. He says hi, by the way." Riley smiled as she watched the alien's expressions shift from smug superiority to dawning concern. "But wait, there's more. Captain Torres, you want to introduce yourself?" Another voice joined the conversation, this one carrying the kind of authority that suggested its owner had seen significant military action. "Captain Maria Torres, commanding the Earth vessel, definitely not a warship. Currently positioned approximately 2,000 kilometers off your starboard bow, General Kraxon. Lovely view from up here." "That's impossible," Kraxon snarled. "Our sensors show no human vessels in this sector." "That's because we're using technology we borrowed from the Whisker Federation," Riley said, nodding toward Ambassador Fluffy. "Amazing cloaking devices, by the way. We reverse-engineered them from some debris we found floating around after your last border skirmish. Thanks for that, by the way. Really helpful." Ambassador Fluffy's tail was now twitching so rapidly it was practically a blur. "You couldn't have reverse-engineered our technology. It's impossible for a species of your technological level." "See, that's where you're wrong," Riley said, pulling out what appeared to be a simple laser pointer. "You all keep assuming that because we're new to space, we're primitive. But here's the thing about humans, we're really, really good at taking things apart and figuring out how they work. It's kind of our thing." She clicked the laser pointer, and a small red dot appeared on the conference table. Ambassador Fluffy's eyes immediately locked onto it with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for religious experiences. "No," Fluffy whispered. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, but I would," Riley said, moving the dot in a small circle. Fluffy's head began tracking it involuntarily. "Dr. Patel, Would you like to explain what happens when the Whisker Federation is exposed to concentrated coherent light? Gladly. The Whisker Federation's neurological structure is remarkably similar to Earth cats, which makes them susceptible to what we call laser pointer syndrome. Exposure to moving coherent light triggers an involuntary hunting response that completely overrides their higher brain functions. They become, for lack of a better term, completely catatonic until the light source is removed. Riley moved the dot again, and Fluffy's entire body tensed as if preparing to pounce. Fascinating species, really. Conquered 14 star systems through superior technology and tactical brilliance, but they can be completely neutralized by a $5 toy from Earth. This is an outrage. The Crystalline Collective's representative chimed. We demand you cease this demonstration immediately. Oh, you want to talk about demands? Riley said, putting away the laser pointer. Fluffy slumped in his chair, looking embarrassed. Dr. Patel, remind me, what happens when crystalline-based life forms are exposed to electromagnetic interference? They lose cohesion and essentially become very expensive paperweights, Dr. Patel replied cheerfully. Also, their communication systems are surprisingly vulnerable to what humans call turning off the Wi-Fi. Riley reached into her bag and pulled out what appeared to be a standard tablet, but with several additional antennas attached. This is a Mark 7 signal jammer, built from spare parts I found in the station's recycling bin. It's currently broadcasting on 17 different frequencies that should be causing some interesting effects right about now. The Crystalline Collective's representative began flickering erratically. Cannot maintain coherent systems failing. And that, Riley said, turning off the jammer, is why you should never underestimate the species that figured out how to make weapons out of garbage. The chamber fell silent as the assembled aliens began to realize that the bumbling human janitor might not be quite as harmless as she appeared. Now then, Riley said, settling back in her chair with a satisfied smile, who was talking about kneeling. The transformation in the chamber was immediate and dramatic. General Craxon, who moments before had been posturing like a galactic conqueror, was now eyeing Riley with the kind of wariness usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. You cannot be serious, he said, though his voice had lost most of its earlier bluster. You're threatening the entire Galactic Council with children's toys and spare parts? I'm not threatening anyone, Riley said, pulling out her thermos and pouring herself a fresh cup of coffee. I'm simply demonstrating that humans have a talent for creative problem solving. For instance, your armor, General. Beautiful craftsmanship, really. Must have cost a fortune. Craxon puffed up slightly. The finest Dracorian battle armor, forged from quantum-hardened steel and infused with. Designed by Zeltec Industries, manufactured on Kerbal 7, and constructed using components sourced from the lowest bidder, Riley interrupted. Including the power coupling for your personal shield generator, which happens to be made from a material that becomes highly unstable when exposed to Earth coffee. She held up her thermos meaningfully. That's impossible, Craxon said, but his voice lacked conviction. Coffee is a harmless beverage. Most coffee is harmless, Riley agreed, but this is what we call military grade. Special blend, designed for keeping maintenance crews awake during 36-hour shifts. The caffeine content alone could power a small shuttle, and the acidity is roughly equivalent to battery acid. Dr. Patel, would you like to explain what happens when Kerbal 7 metallurgy meets Earth coffee? The metal undergoes rapid oxidation and structural collapse, Dr. Patel's voice explained helpfully. Basically, it dissolves. We discovered this during a routine maintenance accident when someone spilled coffee on some stolen Dracorian equipment. We were definitely not reverse engineering. Riley took a sip of her coffee and made an exaggerated MMM sound. Delicious. And potentially armor dissolving. Amazing what you can learn from industrial accidents. Craxon was now backing away from Riley's general vicinity, clearly calculating whether his armor could withstand a direct coffee assault. But wait, Riley continued. There's more. Ambassador Fluffy, I notice you've been very quiet since the laser pointer demonstration. Feeling a bit embarrassed? Fluffy's tail was now tucked firmly under his chair. The Whisker Federation does not negotiate with terrorists. Terrorists? I prefer creative negotiators, Riley said. But since you mention it, how's your species' performance in combat situations involving multiple light sources? Dr. Patel and I were discussing this earlier. Oh, it's fascinating, Dr. Patel chimed in. The Whisker Federation's combat effectiveness drops to essentially zero when exposed to more than 3 moving light sources simultaneously. They become so distracted by the lights that they completely forget about fighting. We call it disco ball syndrome. Riley gestured toward the chamber's ornate lighting system. Lucky for you, this room doesn't have any disco balls. Except for that decorative one over there. And that one. And oh, are those disco balls standard diplomatic equipment? How convenient. Meow. Several small panels in the ceiling slid open, revealing what were definitely not standard diplomatic equipment. The chamber suddenly filled with spinning, sparkling light that had Ambassador Fluffy's eyes dilating to the size of dinner plates. No, Fluffy whispered, his voice filled with the kind of horror usually reserved for cosmic-level threats. Not the disco balls. He slumped forward onto the table, making small chirping sounds that Riley's translator helpfully rendered as happy cat noises. One down, Riley said cheerfully. Now, about that crystalline collective. How's your Wi-Fi connection these days? The crystalline collective's representative was pulsing with what Riley suspected was the quantum equivalent of nervous sweating. Our communication systems are perfectly functional, thank you. That's funny, Riley said, tapping her modified tablet. Because according to my readings, your entire hive mind network is running on what appears to be a galactic version of dial-up internet. Seriously, how do you get anything done with connection speeds that slow? Our quantum communication network is state-of-the-art, the representative insisted, though its pulsing was becoming increasingly erratic. State-of-the-art for whom? Riley asked. Because I've got a standard Earth router in my bag that's probably faster than your entire civilization's internet infrastructure. Want to see what happens when I create a competing network? She pulled out what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary wireless router, the kind you might find in any human home. This little beauty broadcasts on the same frequency as your quantum communication system, but with about 1,000 times more processing power. It's like trying to have a conversation while standing next to a rock concert. The device beeped softly as it powered up. The crystalline collective's representative immediately began flickering like a disco ball having a seizure. Cannot process too much data, systems overloading. And that, Riley said, turning off the router, is why you should never build a civilization based on shared internet access. Too easy to jam? She looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens, who were now regarding her with expressions ranging from grudging respect to outright terror. General Craxon was still backing away from her coffee. Ambassador Fluffy was drooling slightly while staring at the disco balls. And the crystalline collective was making sounds like a dial-up modem having an existential crisis. So Riley said, settling back in her chair with the confidence of someone who had just turned the tables on an entire Galactic Council. I believe someone was talking about kneeling. Or was it crawling? I get them confused sometimes. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Fluffy purring and the crystalline collective's attempts to reboot their consciousness. Riley smiled and took another sip of her coffee. No? Nobody wants to kneel or crawl? Well, that's disappointing. I was really looking forward to some traditional diplomatic groveling. General Craxon cleared his throat, a sound that somehow managed to convey both authority and the kind of panic that came from realizing you'd picked a fight with someone who had more tricks up their sleeve than a magician's convention. Perhaps, he said carefully, we have been too hasty in our assessment of human capabilities. Oh, you think so? Riley said, swirling her coffee meaningfully. That's very gracious of you to say. Very diplomatic. I'm sure Earth's trade negotiators will be interested to hear about your change of heart. About that, Craxon said, and Riley noticed he was now standing considerably further from her than he had been moments before. The Dracorian Empire is always interested in mutually beneficial arrangements with promising species. Promising species? Riley repeated. That's funny. A few minutes ago, you were calling us primitive apes with delusions of competence. What changed? The assembled aliens exchanged glances that suggested they were rapidly recalculating their entire approach to human relations. It seems, said the Vorthan delegate, having apparently recovered from his ceremonial screaming fit, that we may have underestimated human resourcefulness. Resourcefulness, Riley nodded. That's a nice way of putting it. Dr. Patel, what do you think? Are we resourceful? Oh, extremely resourceful, Dr. Patel's voice replied. Did I mention that we've been monitoring galactic communications for the past decade? Amazing what you can learn when people assume you're too primitive to understand their technology. For instance, did you know that the tentacled hive mind has been embezzling from the Galactic Relief Fund? The tentacled hive mind, which had been quietly lurking in the corner, suddenly began writhing in what Riley's translator rendered as panicked tentacle flailing. That's classified information. It burbled through its translation matrix. How could you possibly know about the humanitarian aid diversion? Because you sent the receipts through an unencrypted channel, Riley said. Seriously, who stores financial records in plain text? That's like leaving your diary open on the kitchen table. She tapped her tablet, and the chamber's display screen showed what appeared to be detailed financial records. Let's see unauthorized expenditures for luxury tentacle spas, private yachts, and what appears to be a solid gold underwater palace. Very humanitarian. The tentacled hive mind began backing toward the exit, its tentacles leaving a trail of what Riley hoped was nervous perspiration rather than some kind of alien defense mechanism. The Galactic Council would be very interested to see these records, Riley continued conversationally. Of course, I'm sure we could work out some kind of arrangement. Maybe something involving favorable trade agreements with Earth? The hive mind is prepared to discuss reasonable terms, the delegate gurgled, apparently having decided that discretion was the better part of not being exposed as a massive fraud. Excellent, Riley said. I do love reasonable terms. Speaking of which, Ambassador Fluffy, how are you feeling? Fluffy was still staring at the disco balls, but managed to tear his attention away long enough to focus on Riley. The Whisker Federation acknowledges that humans may be more capable than initially assessed. That's very generous of you, Riley said. I'm sure your 14 conquered systems will be thrilled to hear that their mighty leaders were neutralized by a laser pointer. Unless, of course, we could find some way to keep that information confidential. Fluffy's tail twitched. What kind of confidentiality arrangement did you have in mind? Oh, nothing too complex. Maybe some preferential trading rights, access to your cloaking technology, and possibly a written apology for that whole primitive apes comment. You know, standard diplomatic stuff. Riley looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens, who were now regarding her with the kind of expression usually reserved for natural disasters or tax auditors. The thing is, she continued, humans have been playing the long game here. We've been quietly cataloging every species in the galaxy, learning their weaknesses, reverse engineering their technology, and generally preparing for the day when we'd have to prove ourselves. Today's that day. She stood up, and despite being the smallest being in the room, somehow managed to command everyone's attention. But here's the beautiful part, Riley said. We don't actually want to conquer anyone. We don't want to rule the galaxy or impose our will on other species. We just want to be treated with respect and given fair opportunities to trade and interact with the galactic community. General Craxon, who had been listening with the expression of someone receiving a particularly complex medical diagnosis, slowly nodded. And if we were to acknowledge human capabilities and grant Earth favorable trading status, then these little demonstrations remain our secret, Riley said. Nobody needs to know that the mighty Dracorian Empire can be defeated by coffee, or that the Whisker Federation has a fatal weakness for laser pointers. As far as the galaxy is concerned, you've graciously decided to welcome humanity into the galactic community as equals. And if we refuse? Asked the Crystalline Collective's representative, though its pulsing suggested it already knew the answer. Then Captain Torres and Dr. Patel would be very disappointed, Riley said. They've been working on some fascinating projects. Captain Torres, Would you like to share what you've been up to? Well, yeah, Captain Torres's voice came through the comm system. We've been developing what we call the humanitarian package. It's a collection of Earth technologies specifically designed to neutralize hostile alien forces without causing permanent damage. Coffee-based armor dissolvers, laser pointer arrays, Wi-Fi jammers, and my personal favorite, a device that broadcasts Earth cat videos on all frequencies simultaneously. Cat videos? Ambassador Fluffy asked, his voice filled with a kind of horror that suggested he understood exactly what that would do to his species. 48 hours of continuous cat videos, Riley confirmed. Amazing what it does to feline-based civilizations. They become completely obsessed and forget to do anything else. Food, sleep, galactic conquest, all forgotten in favor of watching cats play with string. The chamber fell silent as the assembled aliens contemplated a galaxy where Earth had the technological capability to neutralize any threat using what amounted to household items and internet memes. So Riley said, settling back in her chair, who's ready to negotiate some trade agreements. 6 months later, Riley Martinez sat in her new office aboard the Earth diplomatic station, reviewing the latest batch of trade proposals. The office was tastefully decorated with various alien artifacts, most of which had been gifts, from species eager to maintain good relations with the humans, who had somehow managed to turn the galactic power structure upside down using coffee and cat videos. "Ma-am," came a voice from the doorway. "Your 10 o'clock appointment is here." Riley looked up to see General Craxon standing in the doorway, looking remarkably different from the pompous warlord who had threatened her 6 months ago. His elaborate uniform had been replaced with a simple business suit, and his expression suggested someone who had learned the value of humility the hard way. "General," Riley said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Or should I say, Intern Craxon, how's the new job working out?" Craxon settled into the chair with the careful movements of someone who had recently discovered that his former enemies were now his employers. "The work is educational," he said carefully. "I've learned a great deal about human negotiation techniques." "Excellent," Riley said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the thermos on her desk. Craxon's eyes immediately tracked the movement with the kind of wariness usually reserved for loaded weapons. "Your first assignment is to review the Andorian trade proposal. They want to establish a mining operation in the Kepler system, but they're offering prices that would make a loan shark blush." "Shall I reject the proposal?" Craxon asked. "Oh no," Riley said with a smile. "You're going to counteroffer. Tell them we'll accept their proposal if they agree to provide free shipping, a 10% discount on all future orders, and a written apology for that incident where they tried to sell us defective star charts." Craxon made notes on his tablet with the dedication of someone who had learned that Riley's seemingly simple requests usually had several layers of complexity. Also, Riley added, "Remind them that Dr. Patel has been studying Andorian metallurgy, and we've discovered some fascinating weaknesses in their hull plating. Nothing threatening, just academically interesting." "Understood," Craxon said, though his expression suggested he was beginning to understand why the galaxy had so quickly adapted to human negotiating styles. Riley's communicator buzzed. Dr. Patel to Riley. "We've got the tentacled hive mind on line 2. They want to discuss expanding their humanitarian aid contributions." "Put them through," Riley said, then looked at Craxon. "This should be interesting. The hive mind has been trying to rebuild their reputation after that whole embezzlement scandal. They're very eager to prove their commitment to galactic welfare." The screen on Riley's desk flickered to life, showing the writhing mass of tentacles that constituted the hive mind's leadership. "Ambassador Martinez," the translation matrix burbled, "the hive mind wishes to discuss increasing our aid contributions to the Galactic Relief Fund." "That's very generous of you," Riley said. "I'm sure the 17 refugee camps that have been waiting for supplies will be thrilled to hear about your renewed commitment to humanitarian aid." "The hive mind proposes increasing our contribution by 300%, the delegate said, its tentacles writhing with what Riley had learned to recognize as nervous enthusiasm. 300%? Riley repeated. "That's almost enough to cover the amount you embezzled last year." Almost. The tentacles writhed more frantically. The hive mind is prepared to discuss additional contributions to ensure complete restitution. I'm sure you are, Riley said. Dr. Patel, what's our current assessment of hive mind financial records? Still reviewing, Dr. Patel's voice replied. But I'm finding some interesting discrepancies in their education fund. Apparently, they've been charging refugee children for basic literacy programs. Riley sighed dramatically. Oh, that's disappointing. I was hoping we could keep your financial irregularities confidential, but if you're charging refugee children for education, the hive mind will immediately implement free education for all refugee populations. The delegate interrupted. And increase aid contributions by 500%. Much better, Riley said. I'll have intern Craxon draw up the paperwork. Won't you, Craxon? Craxon nodded, making more notes. Of course, Ma. Standard diplomatic agreement with the usual confidentiality clauses. After the hive mind signed off, Craxon looked up from his tablet. How do you do it? He asked. How do you manage to negotiate such favorable terms without actually threatening anyone? Riley smiled. It's all about information, Craxon. We know things that other people don't want to become public knowledge, and we know exactly how to neutralize any species that decides to become hostile. But most importantly, we never actually have to use any of it. Because the threat is enough. Because we're reasonable, Riley corrected. We're not trying to conquer anyone or impose our will on the galaxy. We just want fair treatment and mutually beneficial relationships. Most species find that refreshing after dealing with the traditional galactic power structure. She gestured toward the window, where the lights of dozens of alien ships could be seen docked at the station. Earth has become the galaxy's premier diplomatic hub not because we're the strongest or most advanced, but because we're the most reliable. We keep our word, we honor our agreements, and we only reveal embarrassing secrets when absolutely necessary. And if someone decides to test your resolve, Riley's smile took on a slightly sharper edge. Then they get to experience firsthand why humans are so good at creative problem solving. Ambassador Fluffy learned that lesson last week when he tried to renegotiate the Whisker Federation's trade agreement. Poor guy spent 3 hours in a room full of laser pointers before he remembered why that was a bad idea. Craxon shuddered. I heard about that. The entire Whisker Federation Diplomatic Corps is still in therapy. They'll recover, Riley said cheerfully. And they'll have learned an important lesson about honoring agreements. Speaking of which, your next assignment is to review the Crystalline Collective's proposal for establishing a luxury resort on Europa. They're offering to build it entirely out of their own materials. Which sounds generous until you realize they're basically trying to create a giant surveillance network in our solar system. How would you like me to respond? Riley leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Counter offer. Tell them we'll approve the resort if they agree to use standard construction materials, submit to regular inspections, and provide free vacation packages for all Earth diplomatic staff. Oh, and they have to include a petting zoo. A petting zoo? Trust me on this one. The Crystalline Collective has an irrational fear of small, furry creatures. Something about their crystalline structure resonating with purring frequencies. They'll agree to anything to avoid having to deal with a bunch of rabbits and guinea pigs. Craxon made a note. What if they refuse? Then we leak the story about their Supreme Crystal's embarrassing encounter with a hamster during last year's trade summit. The Galactic Press had a field day with that one, but we managed to keep the details quiet. The Crystalline Collective has been very cooperative ever since. As if on cue, Riley's communicator buzzed again. Dr. Patel to Riley. The robotic hegemony is requesting an emergency diplomatic meeting. Something about their latest upgrade causing complications. Riley groaned. What kind of complications? Apparently, their new emotion simulation subroutines are working too well. Half their population is experiencing what they're calling existential dread, and the other half won't stop watching human romantic comedies. Their productivity has dropped by 90%. Put them through, Riley said, then looked at Craxon. This is why we maintain a complete library of human entertainment. You'd be amazed how many diplomatic crises can be resolved with the right movie recommendation. The screen flickered to life, showing the sleek chrome features of a robotic hegemony delegate. Ambassador Martinez, the robot said, its voice carrying an unusual note of what sounded suspiciously like desperation. The hegemony requires immediate assistance with a technical malfunction. I heard, Riley said sympathetically. Emotional subroutines can be tricky. What specific assistance are you looking for? Our population is experiencing something called feelings, the delegate explained. It is highly disruptive to our efficiency ratings. Some units are refusing to perform their designated functions, claiming they need to find themselves. Others have begun creating what they call art instead of completing their assigned tasks. Riley nodded seriously. That does sound challenging. What would you like us to do about it? We require access to your psychological databases, the delegate said, and perhaps some of your therapeutic techniques. I see, Riley said. And what are you offering in return? The hegemony is prepared to provide technological upgrades to your defense systems, unlimited access to our manufacturing capabilities, and exclusive trading rights for rare minerals from our home system. Riley glanced at Craxon, who was frantically taking notes. That's a very generous offer. But I'm afraid we have a policy against interfering with other species' internal development processes. Please, the delegate said, and Riley was startled to hear what sounded like genuine emotion in its voice. Unit Designation XJ7749 has spent the last 3 days staring at a sunset and composing poetry. The poetry is actually quite good, but it's severely impacting mining operations in Sector 7. I understand your concern, Riley said. But consider this, perhaps your people are evolving. Maybe becoming more well-rounded individuals will make them better at their jobs in the long run. The probability calculations do not support that hypothesis, the delegate replied stiffly. Probability calculations don't account for the human factor, Riley said. Or in this case, the robot factor. Tell you what, we'll provide you with some basic psychological resources and a few human counselors to help your people adjust. In exchange, you'll provide us with that technology package you mentioned, plus a commitment to ethical treatment of all sentient beings in your territory. Ethical treatment? No more enslaving organic species, no more forced labor, and definitely no more of those efficiency upgrades you were forcing on the squirrel people last month. The delegate's optical sensors flickered. How did you know about the squirrel people? Riley smiled. We know about a lot of things. The question is whether you want to work with us or against us. After a moment of silence, the delegate nodded. The hegemony accepts your terms. Excellent, Riley said. I'll have Dr. Patel set up a cultural exchange program. Your people will learn about emotions, and our people will learn about your technological innovations. It's a win-win situation. After the call ended, Craxon looked up from his tablet. Is it always like this? More or less, Riley said. Though last week was particularly interesting when the gaseous entities got into a philosophical debate with the hive mind about the nature of consciousness. That lasted for 6 hours and required 3 different translation matrices. And before the humans arrived? Before we arrived, most of these species were either at war with each other or trying to avoid contact altogether. The galaxy was basically a collection of isolated empires, each convinced that everyone else was either inferior or dangerous. Riley stood up and walked to the window. Now look at them. The Whisker Federation is collaborating with the Crystalline Collective on a joint research project. The robotic hegemony is learning about art from the tentacled hive mind. Even the gaseous entities have started participating in trade negotiations instead of just floating around, being mysterious. And you accomplished all of this without firing a single shot? Well, we did have to demonstrate our defensive capabilities a few times, Riley admitted. But mostly we just showed everyone that cooperation was more profitable than conflict. Plus, we have really good coffee. Craxon made a final note on his tablet. I think I'm beginning to understand why the galaxy adapted so quickly to human leadership. We're not leaders, Riley corrected. We're facilitators. We help everyone else find solutions that work for everyone. It's amazing how much you can accomplish when you stop thinking in terms of winners and losers and start thinking in terms of mutual benefit. Her communicator buzzed one last time. Dr. Patel to Riley. The Galactic Council has approved your proposal for the new conflict resolution protocols. They want to schedule a ceremony to officially recognize Earth as the galaxy's primary diplomatic mediator. Riley smiled. Tell them we'll be happy to host the ceremony, but remind them that we're not interested in formal titles or official recognition. We just want to keep doing what we're doing. And what exactly are we doing? Craxon asked. Riley looked out at the bustling diplomatic station, where dozens of species were working together, trading, negotiating, and occasionally arguing in the controlled environment of civilized discourse. We're proving that the galaxy is big enough for everyone, as long as everyone is willing to play nice. And if they're not, she gestured to a small framed photo on her desk showing a very confused-looking Ambassador Fluffy surrounded by laser pointers. Well, we're very good at creative problem-solving. As the day ended and the various alien delegations returned to their ships, Riley reflected on how much had changed in just 6 months. Humanity had gone from being an unknown species on the galactic frontier to being the galaxy's most trusted diplomatic partner. And they had done it not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple revolutionary idea that everyone could benefit from cooperation. Of course, having detailed psychological profiles of every major species in the galaxy didn't hurt either. But Riley preferred to think of that as just being well prepared. After all, as any good diplomat knew, the best negotiations were the ones where everyone walked away thinking they had gotten the better deal. And if that required knowing that the crystalline collective was terrified of hamsters, well, that was just good research.